Vouchers were promoted as a way of giving low-income and minority students in inner-city schools the same choices of a private education that children from well-off homes had. Wisconsin owed its legislative vote for school vouchers to the determined lobbying of Milwaukee's Superintendent Howard Fuller, State Senator Polly Williams, and the financial support of Milwaukee's Bradley Foundation. Michael Joyce, chair of the Bradley Foundation, was frank and open in his support for vouchers for private education as a way of forcing public schools to compete.
There's a huge reluctance on the part of the system to allow this kind of reform. And this has led, I think, to a redefinition of accountability. The school choice movement shifts accountability away from the centralized hierarchical bureaucracy and down to the level of the client or the user, the parent and the student. And I think that's where it derives a lot of its power.
Well, the Bradley Foundation is extreme right-wing, as is the SCAIF and the Olin Foundation, and the three of them tend to support the same kinds of efforts, the privatization of education and other services. I'm sure they're supporting the idea of privatization of Social Security. They don't want the government to be providing Medicaid. Somebody else ought to do that. And so they've got this ideological framework in which they're operating. And they saw Milwaukee as a wonderful opportunity to convince people that private education with the use of vouchers was going to be better for all concerned. And they got people like Howard Fuller to go along with them as the propagandists, so to speak, with the idea, oh, we're only concerned about the children. Well, really? Well, let's talk about what's going on with the children. So the foundations, Bradley in particular, they have Charlie Sykes as one of their fellows who puts out their magazine, who's on WTMJ radio every day, 3.5 hours, constantly telling everybody that private schools would be better, public education's a disaster. And he has no credentials to say that. He's mouthing the platitudes that we get from the Bradley Foundation.
The massive media campaign to promote public funding of private schools in Wisconsin that Ed Garvey describes went into overdrive in other states in the 1990s, with voucher proponents pulling out all the rhetorical stops to denigrate the public schools as places posing actual danger to our children. State Representative Michael A. Fox was the chairman of the House Education Committee that in 1996 brought vouchers to Ohio with an experimental program in the city of Cleveland. This vouchers bill won approval in a landmark ruling in 2002 by the United States Supreme Court, clearing the way for a nationwide expansion of public funding for private schools. Fox, now a Butler County Commissioner, looks back with pride in his close working relationship to the leaders of the school privatization movement in Wisconsin, Polly Williams, former Wisconsin Governor and U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services Tommy Thompson, Howard Fuller, and Michael Joyce.
I think Ohio and the host of it, there was a small group of change agents around the country. Howard Fuller out of Milwaukee was one of them, and I worked closely with him. Jeannie Allen that ran the group in Washington that was kind of the information clearinghouse on community and charter schools. Polly Williams was really a major breakthrough because here was a woman that had run Jesse Jackson's campaign for president, a long-time dedicated Democrat saying it's time to give parents, low-income parents, the same choices that higher-income parents have for their children. Tommy Thompson on the national scene. I mean, so there was a lot of us, work I was doing in Ohio, and all of those things kind of created the critical mass and kept fermenting them, but there were a lot of leaders across the country. You should measure outcomes and performance, not inputs. That the paradigm and the model should be based on how well are the kids doing, not everybody's going to do it this way. I hear public school people all the time say, well, you know, if it were a level playing field and we weren't having all these different things, these regulations that we have to do that they don't have to do, then we could compete. And it's like, okay, let's give them the same backpack of rocks and non-added value stuff that we do in order for them to be every bit as crippled and hobble along as we do. What I suggest to them is, why don't you take the same authority that they have and make your school a charter school?
Coming after more than 10 years of bitter dispute over vouchers, with voters in states such as California, Colorado, Washington, Maryland, and Michigan rejecting them, and 3 states, Florida, Ohio, and Wisconsin, establishing vouchers in some form, the No Child Left Behind Act, as proposed in its original form, had as one of its key provisions that school systems would have to grant vouchers for private schooling to students in underperforming schools. However, to get support for the act from liberal Democrats such as Ted Kennedy, the vouchers provision was changed to a requirement that students be allowed to transfer to superior schools within the same public school system. While putting vouchers on the back burner, the act does preserve the idea that the solution to problem-ridden schools is to let children transfer out of them rather than fix them.
First of all, I'll say in the state of Ohio, currently 10% of public schools are in academic emergency or watch. Those schools fall predominantly in low-income urban areas where the middle class has been siphoned off. We've had white flight and middle class flight to the suburbs where they're building and have enormous building programs, and in the urban areas where we're closing schools. In the meanwhile, this charter school movement, 43% of charter schools are in academic emergency or watch. Yet, this is the threat that's hung over our heads through No Child Left Behind. If you can't get it together in 3 years, then we'll send your kids to charter schools. And it's just the privatization of education from my point of view. And then at the same time threaten us with, and if you don't do well, we'll close your school and send them to charter schools, which are doing worse. I think there are some real problems with the concept.